All right, everybody. Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold. I go by she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm here with Dr. Lisa. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Hello, everyone. Pronoun she, her. We are gearing up here in Denver for another massive storm, so I feel like this is your weekly weather update for the Rocky Mountain region. 11 inches apparently coming my way on Thursday, so woohoo for that.
Just heinous. Just why? Why? And we're still trying to get through the wind. We had wind all day yesterday, last night, into today. It's going to be pretty interesting. But it's beautiful outside. At least the sun is out and, no snow. So that's a good thing. So, but look, this is what happens. What is the opposite of occupational hazard? Residential hazard of living in Colorado, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
That's okay. Well, we have like four seasons in one day here in Maryland, so it just is what it is. We've just come to accept it. And we're getting very close to the cherry blossoms opening in DC, which means beautiful, yet all the folks that have allergies, get ready to suffer, y'all. Get your Claritin, get whatever you need, but get ready to suffer. It's coming.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have not yet seen those blossoms in DC, so I got to put that on my calendar at some point to get out there.
You must. You must. And the best time is early morning before everyone else is out there. The only people that will be out there as the sun is rising is a handful of photographers because they want to get the most beautiful photos of the blossoms, but it's actually quite breathtaking. I've been to cherry blossom several times. I did the cherry blossom 10 miler, which is also gorgeous, but just again, as I mentioned, if you have allergies, start prepping yourself prior to. It's beautiful, but you'll pay for it. Let's put it that way. You'll certainly pay for it. So, oh, so Lisa, phase one. It's about to get messy from the jump, Lisa. It's about to get messy. So, ironically, I'm cleaning house this weekend, and my dad calls me and he says, "Are you watching the women's basketball game?" And I'm like, "Actually, no. I'm doing something else. But what's going on?" And my dad loves women's basketball, college basketball. But I knew if it was something that rose to this level where he didn't text, he called me. I'm like, okay, this has to be a big deal, right? And so apparently there was a bit of a scuffle on the court between LSU and South Carolina. Now, let me preface all of this by saying, yes, we know players, especially when it comes to a championship game, you're going to be a little heated, you're going to be excited, emotions, all those different things are happening on the court. I understand that. There was a scuffle. Camila Cardoza pushed another player. It just got real interesting, right? You can Google the details, but I want to get into the gendered and racial details of this whole tete-a-tete incident, right? If y'all recall, a few episodes ago, we were talking about Draymond Green, pro in the NBA, and his just flat out violence against any and everybody, all this aggression that's going on, right? Fast forward to two college players, women, who get into a scuffle, and you have two coaches. Dawn Staley goes without saying for the Gamecocks. She is incredible. She was incredible as a player, unbelievable as a coach. A black woman. The way she responds to the scuffle on the court, she says, quote, "I just want to apologize to the basketball community. When you're playing in championship games like this in our league, things get heated. No bad intentions. Their emotions got so far ahead of them that sometimes these things happen." So she flat out apologized. Black woman. Now, fast forward to white woman, Kim Mulkey, who says, "It's ugly, quote, it's ugly, it's not good. No one wants to be a part of that. But I'll tell you this, I wish Cardozo, who pushed the player, I wish Cardozo would have pushed Angel Reese, native Baltimorean here. I wish Cardozo would have pushed Angel Reese. If you're 6'8", don't push somebody that little. That was uncalled for, in my opinion. Let those two girls who were jawing, let them go at it." End quote. Excuse me, Lisa. Like, am I overreacting? But how does that land on you that a black female coach responds one way, a white female coach responds completely differently? I'm sorry, but as a leader of student athletes, I'm just flat out not encouraging violence. But as you can see here, we got two different dynamics entirely. What is going on here?
So the second coach, Kim Mulkey, was essentially not apologizing, but rather saying two different players should have actually gone at it, right? So she wasn't.
Equally matched players, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So that's annoying to me. But what actually stuck out to me was the fact that she was like, let those two girls. Yeah, that's a huge pet peeve. Like adult women, not girls,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
but that is interesting. So Dawn Staley, African American woman, is apologizing and saying it's not acceptable, it's not appropriate, whereas the white coach is saying, well, it's fine. You should have just picked on someone your own size and then da 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 da, right? So
Right,
yeah,
right.
like Dawn Staley wouldn't have been able to say that, right? Because
Never.
she would have gotten so much blowback for encouraging violence. And I don't know if this Kim Mulkey is getting any blowback for that. I'm not educated on basketball at college or professional, so it definitely feels a little suspicious. One, that there is such a distinct difference between these two coaches' responses, but I'm also curious about how the commentators handled women fighting on court, and if that was any
Mm-hmm,
as
mm-hmm,
to what we might see with an all male team.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and you know what got me to, I mean, there's so many things that got me about this particular situation, but with Dawn Staley, I don't know Kim Mulkey's resume, but I assume it's quite long. But Dawn Staley's resume, if anyone had the right to say whatever she wanted to say based on skill sets, abilities as a player and as a coach, it would have been Dawn. You're a, 6-time WNBA All-Star. She's been on several of the anniversary teams. Naismith College Player of the Year, all these other major accolades as a player. And then you get into coaching, Naismith Coach of the Year, AP Coach, all these other accolades, A10 Coach of the Year. If anyone would have the right to say whatever they want to say, Dawn Staley would be able to do that. And, an Olympian, come on now. And she realizes the power of her words, even in the oppression of showing up as a Black woman, right? Because she apologized to the basketball community. She didn't even gender that. She just said, anybody that picks up a basketball in our community, I apologize for this behavior, right? Now, later on, I give credit to Camila Cardozo, the student athlete that pushed the other player with LSU. She apologized as well. She said, I would like to extend my sincerest apologies for my actions at today's game. My behavior was not representative of who I am as a person or the South Carolina program. I deeply regret it, et cetera, et cetera. So, for me, I'm just like, look at yes, we're talking about women and basketball, but look at the very clear privilege that's going on in both of these apologies. Like, really? Come on now. This to me reeks of race and knowing one's limitations, what will be accepted, what will not be accepted. If Dawn Staley said something similar, they would be ready to take her job. Like, there would be no limits to how much they would want to punish Dawn Staley in her role as a coach. And Camila Cardozo, who I believe is Brazilian, you really think those Black and brown women can say whatever they want to say compared to a white woman? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Well, and
Absolutely.
there is yeah, it's racialized and it's gendered, obviously, because I'm now thinking when you're talking. So when college men get into fights on the court, like, do coaches apologize for them? Do they apologize, or is that just seen as like acceptable behavior because these guys are like all up in the moment and are it's heated, right? But now the women here are saying they feel like they need to apologize because that's not appropriate behavior. It's
Mm-hmm.
not appro- I mean, I don't agree with the fighting in sport, right? But when you look at the broader basketball context, the heatedness, the pushing of another player is
Hmm.
appropriate in that larger context. But when we break that down by gender and then slice it in race, then the impetus to apologize is really salient as compared to what it might be for men on the court, right? So you've got
Mm.
that gender piece around that's not women behavior, that's not female behavior, that's not appropriate. You have to keep the peace, right? So I see that coming out there, plus the women of color feeling like they need to apologize or come out in a really kind of pacifist kind of way because they know that they can't say anything that would be more aggressive or supportive of that violence because of what you said, right? So
Hmm.
Penny just really landed for me as you were talking, thinking about how women are always demonized if they have behaviors in sport that are perceived as masculine, right? But for dudes, it's fine.
Of course. And it's again saying, okay, well, if a man does it, it's aggressive and appropriate. If a woman does it, she's lost it and she doesn't deserve to play basketball. It's like, the same behavior in different ways. And I'm like, this is interesting. But now I also listened to two male commentators after the fact reflecting on all this, naming the gendered piece, naming the racialized piece, but also, well, they named it without naming it. They said, why Dawn had to apologize and Kim Mulkey didn't. These are two black men talking. They're like, yeah, we know exactly why she had to apologize. So it was kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod. We know what's going here. It's based on race. Um, and the same two commentators also said, oh, but this is exciting though, because people will watch women's basketball more because they know that women have the ability to emote around basketball in ways that aren't common. And so part of me is like, oh, this is interesting that now all of a sudden men are seeing this as a draw to the sport when it's always been, oh, well, they might be as skilled as us, but probably not. But now that they're throwing bows at each other, let's watch because we want to see the cat fight violence between two women.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, that's
that
what it feels like to me.
stinks.
That's what it
It's
feels like to me. Right? Not that it's more exciting because of the fight, but that there's this like aura of quote unquote cat fighting, right? Got to see two women
yes,
fight. Like
yes,
that, yeah, that's gross.
yes. It's disgusting, and it's like, but it's for the good of the sport. And I'm like, why can't the sport just be good? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
why can't the sport and the players who are highly skilled, why can't it just be good? So to me, that flies in the face of, what I just mentioned earlier about so many of
Mhm.
Dawn Staley's previous players being drafted into the WNBA. Obviously, the skill has always been there for Dawn's players and others who were drafted into the WNBA. But now, because it's exciting, because you're not expecting such, you know, violence between women, now it would be called passion with men. But because there's violence involved, now we men want to watch.
Yeah, yeah.
Missing the point.
It's maddening. It is maddening. So okay, so great first phase. I think there's a lot to think about there. So the maddening piece is what's transitioning me into phase two here.
Hmm.
Um, so okay, so we're recording right after the Oscars, so you'll be listening to this a week after the Oscars. But I'm not. I don't. I mean, I used to be much more into film than I am now, but the Oscars was on. I started to watch it, whatever. I can't get the movie song "I Am Ken" out of my head because that was a live performance, and so now it's like rocking around in my head the whole time. That's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about Oppenheimer and the fact that it won 7 Oscars, I believe, including Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Supporting Actor, all white men. I have not seen Oppenheimer, so I am riffing a little bit here based on what I just know about the history and reviews I've read of the movie and some other commentators. And I've always felt this way, like when it came out with Barbie, right? Wasn't it like Barbieheimer or something was the thing that they had labeled it, that
Yeah.
people were just like jumping all over it. And I think more people went to see Oppenheimer than they did Barbie. And it was kind of this head to head of like a movie that centered women, albeit white women, and then a movie that centered white men, and that was the one that got all the Oscar nods, and Barbie didn't get the Oscar nods, right? So I have like a history of feelings around it. But then when Oppenheimer has been doing a lot of the award shows, including the Oscars, what sits uncomfortably for me is the way in which the film industry and our culture elevates and supports white men who do heinous things, and the portrayals of those white men, right? So those white men then become complicated and complex, and the white man who acted, therefore brings that complexity to the surface, and therefore we should award that person with an Oscar. And I keep coming back to the fact that this is a man who invented the atomic bomb. Not a good thing, right? And that bomb was then dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and from what we can tell, somewhere in the region of 120 to 220,000 people died, in addition to the kind of ripple effects of that pain and violence. And from what I understand is that there was no Japanese representation in the movie. So the individuals who were harmed by the development of the atomic bomb weren't in there. And nor were any discussions of the land where the test sites were, and the fact that that was actually populated. There were people there and in the surrounding communities, right? But it's presented as though it was a desert, as though there was nothing there, right? And that's indigenous people, people of color, who have continued to experience cancer and other effects from being in the vicinity of those test sites. And that was just absent from the film. So we are, albeit I don't think the film intended to paint Oppenheimer as necessarily a good person, but it was as a complicated person, right? And there's a comedian called Harry Kondabulu, who I follow on Instagram, and he referenced the piece around the fact that there was no Japanese representation in the movie. That piece wasn't really grappled with at all, and he made the assessment or the comparison that it would be like doing a movie of the 9/11 attacks here in the United States, but running the movie from the side of the terrorist, right, and how they feel, because it would be absent any victims in the United States, in New York City. And that might feel like an extreme comparison, but I think kind of the gem or the point of what he's making is that this was a story that elevated the narrative of this white guy who did a really horrible thing and his like guilt around it. But what was absent was a real empathetic connection to the harm that was caused, and the harm that was caused to almost entirely communities of color, right? And we give that movie Oscars. So it's like, it's this kind of large, I just have this larger discomfort with that, right? And I don't know, Shaunna, if it landed on you similarly. It just feels like this happens over and over again, right? All the time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, to your point, what I appreciate is, the what is that phrase? It's something like the hero or the victor gets to tell the story. And it feels like that's been like the repetitive experience of the Oscar world, is that, because if you think about it, if you think about the other movies that were in those categories, so we've already talked about American Fiction with Jeffrey Wright. Let's see, Coleman Domingo specifically, their characters were kind of the lovable losers, if you will. It was kind of the, yeah, I'm the black man that's trying to write an authentic book, but the system doesn't allow me to. So I have to figure out how am I going to do this and still, take care of my elderly mother, and pay the bills. It was never a quote unquote winner, right? And so, given that, I think that's where the Oscars have always been comfortable. Let's tell the story of the victor through a sympathetic lens that makes us think, oh, well, but he really, really mulled over whether he really wanted to. No, we're not trying to hear that at all. And I think the other piece too is think about the history of the Oscars from both that white perspective of the victor and then also the people of color who have usually been typecast into particular types of roles. And once you break out into that particular type of role, like nobody's going to be comfortable with a Jeffrey Wright's character who was, I believe his name was Thelonious in the movie, Thelonious Ellis, which they called him Monk for short, based on Thelonious Monk. But with his role, everybody comfortable with an intelligent black man that can write a damn book? Are you serious? They are comfortable with other subservient roles of black men or villainous black men, but to be an intelligent, highly intelligent man or Coleman Domingo's role, that is very uncomfortable for the world. And so, given that, they don't always get the Oscar. Hell, half the people that I read the commentary about, because I also did not watch Oppenheimer, I just refused to give that much time to a white boy story. I'm sorry, y'all, it's the truth. Um, when you look at those other roles, and nominations, if you will, a lot of people were thinking, yay, we have more diversity amongst the nominees. And I'm like, yeah, but come on. We get exhausted with being the runner up to everybody else because the story or the art is not acceptable. Like, it's like, come on, what are you saying here? So I
Right.
think the ongoing discomfort with the lack of monolithic perspective of people of color's story, that's the discomfort that's going on here. We're comfortable with
Yeah.
being sympathetic to the white male role. We're not comfortable with people of color outside of these stereotypical roles that usually entertain us.
hmm hmm Yeah, it's interesting because I'm thinking about the other folks who are in that category. So you also had Bradley Cooper, who played Leonard Bernstein
Yes.
in the film Maestro, which I also haven't watched, but I believe he is Jewish. And
Hmm.
then
Hmm.
um, the guy whose name I'm not remembering from the Holdovers, who was the teacher, kind of the older white guy, right? But older guy who's the teacher. And so your point about like kind of like the lovable loser, right? So in that case, he's a person that's portraying a teacher who builds a bond with students as they stay over the Christmas break, I think it is, at the school. That's not villainous, right? And so the person that wins is the person who portrays this pretty big hit figure in history, certainly, but you know trying to add a complicated twist to who this individual is. And I just think, like, should we be celebrating this person? Not the actor Cillian Murphy, but like Oppenheimer, right? Like, the act
Right.
of making a movie to tell that person's story is in and of itself celebration, even if the story being told is not that flattering, right? But
Right.
um, and so it's hard for me to say, like, it's hard for me to look at Cillian Murphy's performance in that film and like look at it abstractly, like separated from kind of this culture of whiteness, or male and whiteness, right, that is celebrated at the Oscars, to be able to say, well, Coleman Domingo's performance wasn't as good as Cillian Murphy's, and that's why he didn't win. There's just not a way to like subtract it from kind of the racialized politics
Yes.
of the way that we celebrate white people's stories vis-a-vis black people in particular, their stories in the
Mm.
United States context, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
it's like, I almost like Jeffrey Wright and Coleman Domingo didn't stand a chance, really. I mean, I thought it was like a
Exactly.
foregone conclusion. There's no way that Cillian Murphy wasn't winning that award because of just what
Exactly.
we understand about how US
Absolutely.
culture celebrates and tells the stories of white people most often. And then if you're a bad white person, then we have, then what a great opportunity for that white actor to add some depth to that character,
Hmm.
when they could just
Hmm.
be a shitty human. And
Right.
maybe we
Right.
should tell that story in the
Right.
movies.
Exactly. Well, I'll have to throw a plug in here. I'm very much looking forward to another movie that's coming out in just a few days that Lisa, I told you about before, that was in the previews of American Fiction. And the movie is The American Society of Magical Negroes. Let me tell you how excited I am about seeing this movie, right? Because it is based on satire, and David Allen Greer is also in it, which I've just loved him since, In Living Color and all those other shows that he was on. But this film, the basic premise of the film is that they have created a society of Black people, and their whole cause, everything that they've dedicated their lives to, is to make the lives of white people easier, right? Sounds very simple, sounds complex though at the same time. And if you think this is all satire, I'm like, ooh, Okay, clearly, Lisa, they are not understanding the world in ways we do. Because I'm thinking to myself, well, so we're gonna have a regular day in the life of a Black person. We just turned it into a
Right,
movie and put some
right.
razzle dazzle on it. Let's do it, right? So I'm anxious to see what the um how can I say what the interpretation looks like, because it was
Yeah,
filmed at Sundance, and I think it got like a grant to even be produced from the get-go, which tells you a lot about
right.
the whole story. But I'm excited to see that because again, this would never be a mainstream film. Why? Because it is the lovable loser. It's not the hero. This is the supporting cast of the historical hero, which are white folks, right? And so, given that, I'm interested to see how they interpret this. But it's going to be released here in the U.S. In a few days now, and also being released in the U.K. So this is going to be interesting to
Hmm.
see. And I'm not a betting woman, Lisa, but if I were one, we could place bets on whether or not it's even nominated for next year's Oscars. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah. My guess would be no. I mean, because it's going to be it's directly calling out white privilege, right? And it's trying to,
Exactly.
it's almost certainly going to make connections to current day. So then how much of that's going to go over people's head? But there are going to be folks who choose not to go see it because they're like
Yes.
either not going to understand the premise or they're going to be offended by the premise, right? So yeah,
Absolutely.
it's going to be a chance. I think it's a again satirical take on the realities of modern day US, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, like I mentioned before, Lisa, I'm always paying attention to these types of movies. And to Dave Chappelle's point, are they laughing too hard and are they laughing in the right places? We shall see. So that one will be interesting. But yeah, let's get into phase three. I know we talk about the Oscars every doggone year, Lisa, but they give us stuff to talk about. That's the issue. Anyway, phase three. So, Lisa, I need to stop living on Instagram. Like I said before, Instagram is like my version of the news. But this was a good one. This was a good one. I think it's really interesting that so hockey, specifically women's hockey, they are piloting something that I think is very cool. Special jerseys, Lisa, which I would have just it's such a microaggression that now I'm like, I'm glad they're lifting this up, right? So female hockey players, they oftentimes can have long hair. So I was just sharing with Lisa, it would literally be the equivalent of Lisa having her ponytail right now where she's playing hockey. She's got a helmet on. Maybe she has a pony that's out and her ponytail is covering Ingerfield on the back of her jersey. Well, for the International Women's Day, which just happened a little over a week ago now, by the time you hear this, the Professional Women's Hockey League decided to make history by increasing visibility of women in hockey. And so now they have this See My Name campaign, which is so cool. Instead of Ingerfield being at the top of the jersey, it is now down at the bottom of the jersey. And for those of us who are not huge hockey fans, I'm just a sport fan in general, y'all. I want to see women and girls in sport everywhere all the time. That's what I'm a fan of. But when I saw this, I was like, that is so cool. I know it hasn't been widely accepted yet, but what I think is so important is that calling it out, naming what the problems are, and naming how simple it was to fix it. Lisa, that was my thing. I'm like, oh, so the sponsor decided not to be seen at the bottom of the jersey. Let's switcheroo. And now the emphasis is on the women and not on the sponsor. I think that's fantastic. So they launched that during the March 8th Toronto versus Montreal matchup. And I know it's a pilot project, but I cannot wait to see if this unfolds because it just seems like a simple fix, Lisa. It's not like we're saying you got to go get a whole new sponsor and whole new jerseys and all that. They put the Velcro jersey names on anyway. I mean, the switcheroo seems simple, but I'm just so pleased to see that happen.
Yeah, it underscores the ways in which masculinity or maleness are so ingrained in sport, right? So if you're thinking about sport as the domain of men and
Hmm.
masculinity,
Hmm.
most men or masculine people have short hair, right? That there is
Mhm.
some gender bending that happens there because obviously some male identified folks do have longer hair, but
Right.
generally speaking, the stereotype, the norm, the kind of acceptable hair for men is short, right? So
Mhm.
having names at the top of the jerseys, whether that's soccer or ice hockey or basketball, is never going to present a problem. There's never going to be a way that you can't see that person's name.
That's
And no
right.
one's given 2 cents of a thought about it, right? But when you start to have more women participate and their hair tends to be longer, again, stereotypically, right? Because that's
Mhm.
an acceptable hairstyle for women. And
Mhm.
the few folks of other genders who have longer hair, like you can't see the
Mhm.
name. So I didn't even think about this until you brought it up, right? So it just shows how kind of ingrained, like, well, that's just the way it is. Like names are always at the top of the jersey, right? I mean, I think about like even US or American football, right? There are many players who have um, braids or dreadlocks or longer hair that
Absolutely.
they're male identifying, and that covers the top, that covers their name, right? So if I'm not
Absolutely.
educated about who these people are by their number, then I don't know who the player is. So there's benefit beyond kind of pulling the curtain back on the gender bias. Like there's universal benefit, and to your point, it's so freaking simple. And I think that that's one of the things that's so interesting to me is that there are these simple tweaks that could be made in sport and outside of sport that would create a more welcome environment for folks of all genders, particularly women. But then
Mhm.
there's resistance to it, right?
That's
Even
right.
though it's really easy. And I think that that resistance to easy changes is just a product of not wanting the sport or the thing to be more inclusive, right? Like,
Mhm. Mhm. Oh
and
yeah, absolutely.
so I think that just illustrates that for me.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I remember, let's make it even messier when it comes to identities and so forth. I remember when Uh, so Deion Sanders went to Colorado to coach, and everyone was all up in arms about the practice jerseys and the spring game jerseys not having the student's name on it anymore, but having their Instagram or their social media handle on it because it fed into what happens to be the context of the day when it comes to college football right now, NILs. If you want to know who my student is, then don't look for their name, look for their Instagram handle, and that will tell you their entire life story. And so, if we have to be in this context, how can we use it to our benefit? Well, a lot of those players went on to be pros, or at least go to the combine and pro days and so forth that were seniors. And so, given that these small changes, they did it for social media. And on top of that, to your great point around how it benefits other people, yeah, we can go with the stereotypical gendered stuff, but we're also not thinking about race. That's one of the things that I love about, like I told y'all, Instagram is my version of the news. Watching college football or college sport of any sort and seeing so many black and brown young men who do have the non-traditional hairstyles that probably would be illegal in Texas because we were just talking about that. So, a kid that has dreadlocks or a kid that has braids or just a kid that has long hair that's a student athlete and it would naturally cover their name. Why not? It is so simple. And who is it really harming? Nobody. You have on the school's colors, they know what team you're playing for. Why is it fair for them to know what team you're playing for or what sponsor you have or if it's Adidas, Nike, or Under Armour, but it's not okay to know the name of the student that's actually playing the game? Beneficial, highly beneficial. So, I'm just so frustrated. I'm happy about this, but also very frustrated at how we do use the resistance. We make things complicated as a point of resistance when it could be something that is so very simple. And now, given that, for folks that are listening to this podcast, naming when you see the resistance in whatever context you find it.
Yeah.
Because, I shared with Lisa before we started recording how interesting it's been that for decades we've all baked into this culture of, oh, we're going to make it our business to know whether Lisa and Shaunna are Miss, Mrs., MS, MRS. We're going to make it our business to do that because we need a difference between married, unmarried, divorced, whatever status women. But then we don't want to actually put the same level of energy into inclusion, which would be about pronouns and appropriate honorifics and Mr., Mrs., mix, whichever honorific that person desires. It's it's difficult when you don't want to do it. It's easy when you do want to do it, and that's what I'm not here for. And so, how do
Mhm.
we continue to name that when we find it?
Yeah, and the honorific thing is interesting, right? Because yeah, some people get really, really pissed about that, but it's all defined around boxing in women, right? We think about
Hmm.
cisgender women, kind of heterosexuality, the Miss versus Mrs., because it's always
Hmm.
Mr. and Mr. I guess, yeah, it's
That's
Mr. and
right.
Mr. Right? Like there's no change there. So it's all around
Exactly.
controlling boxing in women. And then, we want to make some shift in that, then, all hell breaks loose. So it's maintaining control. I'm not quite sure where the keeping the name at the top versus the bottom of the jersey, what the control piece would be there, other than just kind of normalizing like white males, I guess, in sport. But I just find, yeah, I just find like, really, you don't have anything better to do with your time than get mad about honorifics or pronouns or where the jersey name is, like, or whether it's a social media or their name. Like, seriously, that's the thing, that's the hill you want to die on, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's really simple.
Hmm.
That creates a bigger tent, right? So more people feel included. I do not understand, like, on a really
Hmm.
kind of simplistic level, like, real, like, wow.
Hmm.
you know
Hmm.
like, sure, this is how you've thought about life your whole life, but that doesn't make it right. Like, just change
Yes, it
direction.
does, Lisa. Anything that's different from how I was raised is wrong. Period. That's it. That's all. I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, whatever. I mean, we see the same thing, Lisa, all the time when someone asks us, is it Miss, Mrs., or Mrs., and you and I both say, actually, it's Doctor. Thank you. Then we're the ones that are painted as assholes when that's actually just accurate. We are doctors.
yeah,
You asked for
yeah,
an honorific, we gave you the accurate one,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
given that, people want to push back against that. Well, such and such asked to be called Mr. or whatever. Well, that's accurate for them. This is accurate for me. Let's move
Hmm.
forward. So, I just think it's very interesting, the power play, even with the jerseys. Now, I can understand it a little bit more in the pro level of sport because it's the fight between honoring women in this case or a sponsor who's actually paying the bill. Of course, there's going to be some tension there, obviously, because money is money. But, some of these hills that people choose to die on didn't have to be hills. Like, is it really that important to you because it's important to us?
Yeah. And I'm thinking about, like, soccer jerseys and American football. There aren't sponsors on the back of those jerseys, are there? It's just the name at the top and then the number below it. Like, when there,
Hmm.
I don't think, like, I'm thinking it's on the sleeves and on the front often. So,
Hmm.
like, in terms of that switch in professional sports, like, we're not even, I could understand a sponsor being like, well, now I'm going to be covered by hair, and that is not good for me and my
Right,
sponsorship, right?
right, right, right.
But I don't even know that that's an issue. Like, so that's interesting. Like, so I mean, I have no idea whether the sponsors are annoyed about this hockey maneuver, but this could be easily rolled out everywhere.
Oh,
Although,
yeah,
actually,
for
well,
sure.
we have to have, women playing in the NFL. Like, that would need to be a thing, which is not yet a thing, right? Or in baseball, right? So
Exactly.
that's probably the hill to die on first, is getting women's leagues in those areas versus where the name is located on the jersey. But in the case where
Exactly.
there are women in the leagues, then we could have the conversation, right?
Exactly. There you go. One thing at a time. One thing at a time.
Right.
But you're right, though, for most jerseys, it's the sponsor, kind of regardless of sport, the sponsor is on the front, the number and name are on the back with no sponsor. So it just happens to be in this particular league, the sponsor is also on the back. So, I think all of that is fascinating and important to think about because again, to your great point, changing the name, even if this is just a pilot, I want it to be more than that. But even just as a pilot, it should have people thinking,
Right.
Oh yeah, we need to change the jerseys. Oh, wait a minute. Well, we only have a handful of women. Oh, wait, that's the new problem. That's the actual problem. We don't have enough
Right.
women in da da da.
Yeah.
So, thinking about all of those things, again, that requires systems thinking. Lisa, hello. Do people really
Mhm.
want to think in systems? No, not really. That
No,
makes things
systems
more
is hard.
complicated.
It does.
Yes, it's
It
too
does.
hard.
Yeah. So on that note, let's leave it there for this week. So
Yes.
Shaunna, where can folks find us on the interwebs?
Well, look, I already told y'all I'm going to be on Instagram the majority of the time. Lisa and I are sending each other Instagram messages back and forth about things we want to bring up here with you all. But of course, for Unfazed, Unedited, you can certainly see us at the YouTube page. We are on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Follow us, leave a review there, please. We're on Instagram at Unfazed Pod, LinkedIn at Unfazed Pod. And of course, if you have a question, an article, anything that pops up for you, we never run out of content to talk about. So please send us what you'd like us to talk about at info@unfazedpodcast.com. Make sure you share us with your folks. I actually had someone that reached out to me last week saying, "Hey, where's the podcast on XYZ?" And I sent them the link so that they could share it with their staff at work. So please share it. If you liked this week's episode, like it, share it, subscribe it, leave a review. Tell us what you think. If you didn't like it, leave a review. That's fine too. Tell us about it. But please make sure you share it with anybody in this phase of your life. All right. Until next time. See ya.
See you next week.